So you did now learn how to build structural directives and how to build attribute directives. They are very similar, but they differ in what they do to the element where you add them, and they also differ regarding how you use them. Structural directives are used on an ng-template element or prefixed with this asterisk. Attribute directives are simply added as attributes onto elements like this. Now, it is possible that you have some directive that maybe enhances an element in a way that should be applied to multiple of your components. So you have a directive and you have multiple components, and maybe some of those components should have the same features the directive provides. To give you an example, I'll add a new directive here with nggd, and I'll name it log and skip those tests. And that will just be some dummy directive I want to add here. And the idea behind this log directive is simply that I want to add a click listener to the host element where this directive is added to, and then trigger a onLog method, which I'm adding here in this log directive class, where I'll console log clicked, and where I then also want to log some details about the host element that was clicked. So I'll inject that host element reference by using the inject function and injecting element ref as you learned it. And then here we can also log this. And in more advanced apps, we might be sending that to some backend server or do anything like that. And now we could, of course, add that to elements. We could add it to this paragraph here, for example, this helpful resources you might want to use paragraph. We could add app log here. And to make it available, we of course then also need to add the log directive here to the imports of this learning resources component. But we also might want to add that directive on one of our own components. So in the app component, we might want to add app log here directly on the app learning resources component, so that when this component is clicked anywhere in that component, we want to log information about this component host element. To make that work, we also have to import this log directive and add it to the imports here in the app component. With that done, if we reload, if we clear that, you see if I click on helpful resources, I get two logs, one with details about the paragraph and one with details about the component element, which makes sense. But now let's say we also want to log clicks onto the app auth component and also clicks to elements that use the app auth directive, like this. We can, of course, add this directive in all these places. And if I reload, we therefore see that log here for app auth. And if I log in here as an admin and I click here, I get that log about this admin paragraph, whereas I don't get that if I click on a regular guest user, because I only added app log here on this first paragraph. But whilst we can do all that, that is, of course, quite a bit of repetition. Having to add this directive here onto all these elements and having to add it here to this imports array, that is some repetition. And that's why Angular gives you a different mechanism for situations like this, where you might have a directive that contains some functionality that should be incorporated by other directives or components. So what we can do here is get rid of that log directive import in the app component and get rid of the usage in the app component template in all the places where I did use it. And with that changed, we can instead go to the auth component, for example, and add a new property to this component decorator configuration object. We can add the host directives property. And this takes an array of directives that should be added to this host element. And then, no matter how often we use this component anywhere in this application, it will always have that directive added onto it. So here it's then this log directive, which I'll add as a value for host directives like this. With that, if we save that, if we go back and I click onto this auth component, I still get that log here, but now without adding the directive on the host element in the template, but instead by using it here with that host directives feature. And I could, for example, also use this in the save link directive. There, we could also add host directives and add the log directive here. And if that directive would take any inputs, we could set them here through this host option. But this directive doesn't take any inputs, so we're good. And now any save links would also have this logging behavior attached to them. Now it's different for the auth directive, though. There we could also add it, but since this is a structural directive, and since in the end it will always end up on an ng template element, the log directive wouldn't have any effect here. But the great thing is that we can merge this host directives setting with the regular usage of a directive. So we could still go back to the app component and bring back the log directive here, still import it and add it to imports, and still use it in the template where needed, for example here, on this paragraph, whilst at the same time deeply incorporating it into some elements like this auth component. So that now if I go back and reload, if I click here, I get this output for the auth component, but for example also for all these save links, as you can tell. And that's therefore also a feature you should be aware of, because that allows you to compose directives or components by merging behaviors and features that have been defined in other directives with each other. So it in the end allows you to build components or directives as layers of other directives if needed. Just as directives overall, this is probably not a feature you'll need all the time as an Angular developer, but it is a feature you should be aware of.